Grassroots is brought to you by Work It, meeting the needs of entrepreneurs in Stillwater since 2017. Welcome to Grassroots, a podcast series for growing civic engagement through conversation. I'm Chris Peters.
And I'm Michelle Charles, and we're your hosts for this series.
Here is part 3 of our conversation with Will Joyce, running for re-election as Mayor of Stillwater.
I'm going to transition with that into looking at city council.
All right.
I mean, speaking of responsibility, for sure. Let's talk about that. How do you see the role of city government in people's lives?
The city council in a town like Stillwater, with a council manager form of government, is it's the legislative body of the city, right? It's legislation, oversight. I explain this to Cub Scout groups all the way up through, civic groups here, because there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding about what the role of the city council and the mayor are. But we're the legislative body for the city, right? So we're our job's to make policy. It's to oversee the operations at a high level, right? Because we're not there on a day-to-day basis. We hire a city manager. The city council, by charter, does not have authority to deal with employees below the level of the city manager. And so it's a high-level oversight in terms of operations. But really, our job is to translate the policy of the city into or translate the will of the community into policy for the city. And that comes in the form of budgets. It comes in the form of lawmaking, zoning, ordinances of all different types of things. I mean, one of the things, that's maybe the easiest example we've had over the last couple of years is the chicken laws, right? It used to be unlawful for you to keep chickens in your backyard in Stillwater. And
Even though we knew
many
people did. And
we had some groups that came and said, hey, we think this should be changed. And we did a whole analysis and we wrote a new law and changed it. I mean, that's the city council's role. It's policy making based on what the community wants our city to be.
Specifically on something like that, does it help when it's something that other communities around the country have, because we weren't the first to legalize backyard chickens. Does that help in your guys's, or at least in your personal research, when you're like, okay, and then you can go and see, okay, this community's had it for a decade, and there's not like chickens running all over town causing trouble.
Gangs of chickens roaming the streets.
Well, yeah, you can certainly look at other places and see the good and the bad, right? This one seems to have worked, or you can go back and find, places where they allowed roosters and then that turned into a problem, and, that sort of thing. So yeah, it certainly helps to have some reference in other places. But, I think the first thing you figure out when you start doing that is that every place is unique, right? Every community is unique. If you took Tulsa's backyard chicken laws, I don't know what Tulsa's are, or some city in California, and you try to move them just straight to Stillwater, you would have some problems, right? And we as a council, I think, have to be kind of careful about doing that sort of thing, right? Because not only are there, hard factors that are different, but there's also community factors that are different. I mean, Stillwater is a rural community in a lot of ways, right? So there is much more of a understanding and than you might see in Dana Point, California, or something along those lines, right? I mean, so their laws maybe don't translate directly across, and I think you have to be aware of that.
Though, I mean, places like Key West, it's like part of the charm, right? I actually sat there and watched a bunch of little chicks running around under a woman's table at a restaurant in Key West.
And I think
chickens in Key West.
Oh yeah, they're just
roaming
wild.
The streets.
Yeah, they're
everywhere.
wild, and that, I think, is a great example of the fact that you have to go, okay, well, there are some other things about being in Key West that make chickens running around loose not such a big deal.
Kind of
right?
offsets
because
it.
You're out in Key West.
You're
right?
in Key West.
Now, if you're in Stillwater in February and there's a bunch of chickens running around.
On the deck at Zanotti's.
Exactly, yeah, downtown chickens roaming. I think you'd go, well, there's maybe not other benefits here that make this something I'm willing to ignore.
That's true. When I'm in Key West, I don't care about
you don't
much.
Care, right?
Not chickens. So we live close enough to Boomer Lake to where the geese like to come visit our neighborhood,
Yes.
and they'll block the street and you know there's and even the path on Boomer, like, oh, it's full of geese poop, but and not expecting the city or any, I think we just gotta deal with it. But if there was suddenly like just a massive amount of geese that were more and more were coming here, I don't know, we'd probably need to do something.
I would actually love to see us do something about that now, because the geese are a problem.
What can be done?
I don't know. I mean, that's part of the problem with, you know, this is a good conversation about the layers of government, right? I mean, geese are federally protected migratory birds.
Okay.
Right. So there's certain, you know, you can't just go out there and say, hey, we're going to have a community goose hunt necessarily.
Right.
So
but you might, depending on
trap one and then just throw it on the grill.
Or like cannons that just go off every so often and make them really unhappy.
Yeah, which, you know, then you've got
the neighbors
that
would
makes
love
humans
that.
unhappy too, by the way.
That might not like that.
And
the humans who live around the lake might also be unhappy.
That's a, you know, it's something that I've actually thought about, and we haven't actually delved into a whole lot in terms of what can be done about that. But that's I mean, I think another good example of sort of a community issue that the council would, you know, needs to probably be involved in and kind of dive in and say, okay, can we do something about this? What could we do about it? Is the solution worse than the problem?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those kinds of discussions, that's the council's role. The council can take things like that up and say, okay, let's figure out what people want to do. Let's figure out what's possible. We do also employ the city attorney at the council level, and so we can get the legal advice and so, okay, what can be done? But that's a good example of sort of a community policy issue that the council would take up.
So going back to the chickens, because I do think that there was a lot to that people didn't realize. You had people who were already keeping chickens, you know, because they were like, who am I hurting? They're in my backyard. I just want a couple of hens, whatever. And then you had the neighbors who, you know, say the chicken gets over in their yard, or they decide something's kind of smelly, or they get mad and they don't like it. It was a balancing act, I think, between what people were already showing they wanted based on what they were doing without official, you know, approval. And then you had the people who were actually, you know, lobbying to get something about it. But then you had the concerns of the neighbors as well, and figuring out a way to implement policies that would be fair and, you know, that wouldn't unduly, I don't know, put a hardship on anyone who was living around said chickens, I guess.
Yeah, no, it did involve a number of different discussions and talks with different different people who are concerned in different ways, right? Because the only reason it comes up is because somebody complains about somebody else having chickens, right? I mean, the police in Stillwater do not go around actively looking for chickens, or didn't before. And there is no, you know, now that we have some ordinances in place that require certain size of coop and certain distances from the lines, those things are not actively inspected in any way, right? They rely on, oh, hey, this person, you know, there's a complaint file, that sort of thing. So you kind of have to look back at that and see, okay, how much is that, you know, what have complaints been filed about, right? Which normally are just free running chickens, or roosters crowing, or, you know, those kinds of things are the issues that come up. Most people don't have any problem with their neighbor having a small chicken coop, you know, which is away from the fence and that is well maintained. It doesn't look terrible and all that kind of stuff. So, there's a lot of, I think, that's kind of the art of being a counselor at some level, is one, figuring out what all the sides are, what are the concerns that are going to be out there, and then talking to those folks and having those conversations in such a way to try to determine what are the interests behind their positions, and then, you know, trying to draft a compromise, right? Trying to figure out, okay, what we really, you know, here are the main concerns, here are the parts where somebody might worry about that. I mean, we had folks who wanted there to be no limits on how many chickens you could have, and they could come in the house and they can, you know, and then we had folks who didn't want them at all, right? So you try to find that middle ground and find a policy that works for as many people as possible.
Now there's an aspect to that staff is involved. So for the chicken aspect, was that more like the city attorney's office, like trying to go and look at, you know, either other communities' laws? I mean, I'm sure it's pretty easy. Let's just go pull up all their ordinances and see what we can copy and paste and change, versus anybody going and look at, you know, the chicken advocates, the blog that's saying here's how the ideal way backyard chicken should be and stuff. And that's a lot of heavy lifting though on staff, right? Rather than city council having to like nerd out about chickens.
Yeah, we didn't spend a whole lot of time looking up chicken regulations from a council perspective. We did have local advocates who proposed certain things like, hey, this is something that's used somewhere else, and this is something that we think is viable. We did have the city attorneys look at what what's out there from another community, or what are the concerns that we might have. We had staff from animal control, animal welfare that have dealt with complaints before about chickens, talk about, okay, what do we see in terms of complaints, or what are the concerns that we might have out there. So you have the community bringing proposals or possibilities. You have the city attorney's office sort of vetting those and measuring them against other either other statutes we have or other statutes that other communities have. And then you have, other staff, non-attorney staff kind of talking about, okay, what does this look like from a regulation perspective? How does it affect what we're already seeing? You kind of want to get on the ground with, okay, who's going to be dealing with this? What does it look like from an inspection standpoint? Or how would we handle, if you put a regulation in place that's really difficult to enforce or that people don't understand, you want to hear from the actual people on the ground who are going to be dealing with it. So you try to get as many of those voices involved as you can.
I think that's a really interesting overview of just kind of how something works its way through city government.
It's more complex than just, that 1 hour sitting in city council and then here's what our suggestion is. Okay.
And a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of different considerations, to think about, right? So I'm going to make an analogy here that probably isn't going to work, but medical marijuana laws in the state of Oklahoma.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
There were a lot of conversation about that before a referendum was finally passed that made medical marijuana legal. The state legislature wasn't willing to engage really in that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. For the most part, all of those possible bills were sort of shut down. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. They weren't willing to do that work of how do we get these, clearly there's some people who want this. Clearly there's some people who don't. Let's figure out if there's some kind of middle ground. And so what happened in Oklahoma with medical marijuana is that since the legislature wouldn't act, folks who really did care strongly about having access to medical marijuana wrote their own law and passed it through a statewide referendum, which is possible also at the city government level, right? I mean, if we would not have engaged with folks who cared about having backyard chickens, they could have said, well, we're going to just write a chicken law and we're going to do a petition and we'll put it on a ballot and we'll have people vote for it, right? And they can go around the legislative body if the legislative body is not acting.
How many signatures for a local one would you need?
Well, it's based off same with the referendum. So it's based off the voting, the last elections voter turnout.
Okay.
And I think it's
so is that 25%?
I think it's the same as kind of the recall numbers or that sort of thing.
So you need like 1,000 people. You get 1,000
we had it
people
here
on the
with the TIF originally. We had folks who talked about trying to get enough signatures to challenge. I mean, because that was an ordinance we had passed that you wanted to do a referendum to overturn. You can do the same thing with to just start your own ordinance. And so the point of bringing that up is to say, we as a council, I think a legislative body in general has to be willing to engage in these kind of conversations in order to craft a bill, a final law that makes the most sense for everybody and makes the most sense for the community. I would argue that the medical marijuana bill that was finally passed in Oklahoma through referendum is not the right bill for the state of Oklahoma. Not that I'm against medical marijuana, but it is really causes problems because it was totally written by one side's lobby and the state government does not have any kind of insight or action that they can take to deal with some of the issues that have come up. And that's what happens when the legislative body doesn't engage the way it needs to engage with folks to come up with laws that make sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure, because now you've got this law that is part of the state constitution that is very difficult to modify. And the implementation is problematic at times.
I mean, the clearest example of it came early on when we passed a bill for the medical use of marijuana that includes the ability to smoke unfiltered marijuana cigarettes without a doctor being able to say, well, no, I'm not prescribing you. That's not good for you, right? You can get THC in this other way that will help treat, but smoking a marijuana cigarette is probably not the healthiest thing, whether it's for anybody or just for that specific patient. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not allowed under the way the bill's written, right? The Oklahoma Health Department tried to come in and say, well, we need to limit the ability to smoke marijuana because we're treating this as a health issue, and that's unhealthy. We know smoking is unhealthy. I don't care what you're smoking; it's not healthy.
Yeah. Opium, right? Tobacco,
it's bad for you.
Right.
And so, but that, we don't have the ability to do that.
Can't limit that delivery method,
right? And so it's unfortunate, and it's unfortunate because of a legislative body that didn't find a way to craft a bill that made sense on a large scale level.
Well, and something that, of course, we've seen in the city is that the way the law is written, the city council doesn't have the ability to turn down an SUP to put a dispensary or some type of a facility somewhere as long as the zoning allows it.
Yeah.
The zoning and distance to school and church or something like that.
All that matters from our perspective is if they meet the minimum requirements, and I think it's just a school. I don't think there's anything else in the...
It's just school.
I can't remember, but there's a minimum distance for something.
Yeah.
If it's allowed in the zoning classification and it meets the minimum distance requirements, there's really no regulation the city can have, which is less regulation that we're allowed to have on other types of businesses, right? Because even in businesses where they might be allowed in the zoning, there's at least some things that you can kind of come in and say, well, okay, but we need you to do X, Y, or Z, or we have the ability to say, well, that even if it does technically meet the zoning requirements, maybe, maybe not. And so it's a problem. And really this goes back to just legislative function, right? And what you want from a legislative body, the council, especially in a city like this where you just have 5 councilors. You need people who are going to have all those conversations, going to have those difficult conversations, who are going to recognize when we need to take action and how to do so in a way that takes into account as many of the different viewpoints as you can. And it's hard work, right? I think that's the part of it that is probably the least fun, right? Because you have people that you may agree with on all kinds of other stuff that now take a contrary position. I really hate chickens. I don't want to, and this is somebody that you work with or go to church with or your kids go to school with. And you kind of have to go, well, I appreciate that. I really like you, love hanging out with you, but I disagree with you about chickens, right? So that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road when it comes to the council, and having folks who are going to engage at that level is really important.
So having said all that, the mayor is a city councilor.
Yes.
And is one of 5 votes on the council, but has additional responsibilities and is kind of viewed as the face of the city. But how do you see the role of the mayor, really? Having done it for a while, what is the role of the mayor above and beyond being just a city councilor?
Well, so there's the statutory role of the mayor, which is, what my role is as mayor is a councilor. I have 1 vote on the council. I don't have any additional power. I don't get to, make laws by myself. I'll get to one exception to that. And I lead the meetings. All right. My job is to run the meetings. I'm the chair of the board, and just like the chair of a nonprofit board here in the community, the chair is the one who gets the meeting going and keeps everybody on the agenda. And really that's the only additional duty that I have as mayor above being a councilor. And so from a what's required standpoint, that's about it. Now, from what's, I think, perception, there's a lot more to it. And I think the title of mayor carries an expectation from people in the community, right? That they expect I actually do have more authority to do certain things than I actually do. But also they expect that the mayor is going to be vocal and speak on issues and is going to present the perspective of the city and is going to kind of be the face or the voice of the council in a lot of ways, which is, I think, understandable. It doesn't, but it doesn't tie into any sort of underlying authority that the mayor has, right? So it's a little different. And I talk to people about the difference between what we do in Stillwater, mayor council, or a council manager form of government, where the mayor is just one of the counselors. Same in Oklahoma City, right? I mean, Oklahoma City is the same way. They have a part-time mayor who's the chair of their council. And then there's Tulsa, which is a strong mayor form of government, and they don't have a city manager. The mayor is the city manager, and the mayor is not a voting member of the council. The mayor is more of an executive, sort of like the president and the legislature at a federal level. But G.T. Bynum and the mayor of Tulsa and David Holt, the mayor of Oklahoma City, are seen, from a perception standpoint, their expectations people have of them are very similar, right? And they're both mayor, and they're both, so you have this idea that, okay, well, they just basically do the same job, but they have very different jobs based on the way their cities are run. And so there is that, living up to that sort of expectation and kind of giving people that voice and helping, be an advocate for certain things and all that kind of stuff is all sort of extracurricular to the mayor's job. And I think it really depends on who the mayor is and how willing they are to do that, and how much, extra time they're willing to spend on all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's something that I have spent a lot of time doing in my 4 years.
There also seems to be an expectation that people will see you out and about at events.
Yes.
That there are a lot of events.
Yes, there are.
And I can remember years before I started covering anything, being involved with an organization. And I remember them saying, and this was when Bud Lacey was mayor, and they were just like, if we could just get the mayor to show up at our event, it would really give us legitimacy. I mean, it means something to people.
It does.
To have that FaceTime and to kind of get that official, not stamp of approval necessarily, but that official recognition, I guess. I don't know. How many events have you had to go to, and what do you find in terms of that?
I go to a lot of events. I get invited to things a lot, and I try to make it as much as I can to usually to the community, to the fundraisers for the United Way and CASA and those kinds of places, and to groups that are trying to do good in the community. I try to be at as many of those things as I can, and I think people do see it as valuable, even though it's sort of odd to me, because I kind of go, I'm not sure what it adds to anything for me to be here. But it does. I think people feel seen. They feel like their work is being acknowledged. If city, counselors, city government, somebody is kind of the mayor is paying attention and keeping track. And so I do that as I do that as much as I can. I did that before I was the mayor, right? I mean, we like to go to the sort of the fundraisers and be engaged in as many things around town as we can, because it's part of the community, and those are the things, going back to why I got involved in the first place. I want Stillwater to be the kind of place that people look at and say, oh, I could go there and I could live there, and there's things for me to do and there's things for my family to do. So being engaged at, in those different activities is part of that. So yeah, it's time consuming. It's a challenge sometimes, right? I mean, it is a challenge to get to all the stuff, but when I get invited to Boy Scout groups to come talk about being the mayor for part of their merit badge requirement, I mean, that stuff's great. I really love to do that. And I try to get to as many of those speaking opportunities as I can, because I think there is a lot of education that can be done and a lot of explanation for folks to kind of get a better sense of how the city works.
Okay. So you said there are things that the mayor can do on his or her own, though.
Yes, there are. So we learned that the last couple of years.
Right.
I learned in March of 2020 that the mayor does have emergency declaration powers. in the case of emergencies in the community, and that I, as the mayor, have the ability to sign emergency declarations that require certain things, and that's allowed under state law and under our local charter as well. So I think a lot of us learned that in March of 2020, that mayors and the governor, to some extent, or governor to even a bigger extent, has the ability to to tell businesses that they can't be open, or to cancel events, or to do the kinds of things that need to be done in the case of an emergency situation. And that was news to me. I think I kind of knew that something like that was possible, like just thinking about tornadoes or that kind of stuff that comes through. But very interesting time here a couple years ago when we first had to start dealing with COVID.
And I think you having to exercise those emergency powers kind of awoken a lot of people into exactly how much impact your local mayor and the council, but in this situation, the local mayor actually has on your day-to-day life. Like, are you, like I said, maybe now you're having to close up your business or figure out how to do your business online, or, you're working at this job and your job's like, hey, don't come in. We don't know how we're moving forward with this new, that the mayor put in this emergency order that we've got to do this. So I think a lot of people kind of woke up to, oh my gosh, this is actually more impactful to me in the immediate acute sense than whatever like the president is doing at a federal level.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of renewed some interests in local politics and local stuff. So you only have one challenger this go around, but last year, we had 7 or 8 people running for city council?
I think we had 7.
And then we know you guys are getting ready to go through a possible application, or gone through an application process for the empty seat. And there's 10 people?
10 applicants.
I mean, that's for, civic engagement and stuff. The more the merrier, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that there are folks who have, certainly the running aspect last year, where we had multiple people sign up to run for that seat, I think was probably the biggest change, right? That was different than what we've seen with city council seats in the past. Now, the application one, when I applied in 2015, I think there were 8 or 9 of us that were on there. And so a lot of people, I think, look at it and go, oh, I can do it without having to campaign. That sounds like a good idea.
Yes.
But yeah, to have people actually sign up and campaign, that was a good thing. And I think it was, unfortunately, we didn't see it carry over this year. We only had 2 people sign up for the mayor's race. We didn't have anybody sign up for the city council or for the school board seats.
Very surprising.
That surprised
me. I was surprised there too. And I am all for people putting their name out there and having these things be real races and have real conversations. And Christy Hawkins on the council, who was elected in that race last year, is the only other counselor on the council right now who's done it, who's had to campaign for anything.
Wow.
Which is, it's not against them necessarily, but Elaine was appointed in 2015 and has never had a challenger in her re-elections. Amy was appointed in 2019. Well, 2018. Yeah, she was appointed when I was elected mayor. So she hasn't had to run again. John Wedlake ran unopposed in both of his elections.
Right.
No.
Oh no, he
did have what's his name?
Was it Bryce? Was that his name?
That's
no, that was last year.
No, it wasn't Bryce. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah. No, I remember.
Slade.
Yeah.
Slade.
Yep.
So
Slade Mileage.
That's true.
Yep. So he did run a campaign.
He did. It's more likely to find a counselor who has not had to campaign much. And my first campaign in 2016 was against somebody who signed up that nobody knew and that didn't campaign and didn't show up and didn't do anything. So I technically was elected, but it was not a really a contested race, and I think that's a problem. I do. I think when I was elected mayor in 2018, Kevin Clark and I had I thought a good campaign and had a lot of good conversations, and I met a ton of people and had a lot of discussions with folks about what they wanted to see in the city, and that has absolutely made me a better mayor in the job because I had those conversations with some people who didn't necessarily support me being the mayor at the time. And so, and have, a relationship with Kevin that I think has been very positive because of that and because of that race. And so, I think those are good things. I think it's good to have, an opponent this time around and to be able to have these conversations. And if we wouldn't be sitting down necessarily and doing this podcast if this wasn't a contested race.
Yeah, we were actually really worried. It was like, oh my gosh, it was the last day. And I was like, we're just going to have Will on and eventually Tim Riley to talk about, what, like, oh, we need a contest here. And it's good for the community. It's good for democracy. And then I guess a little bit more of a hardball question. What do you feel is city government's and the mayor's role when it comes to public health? We're going to kind of jump right into that because that was, you
already kind of touched on it, talking about emergency orders.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting conversation. It's certainly not something that came up in our last campaign for mayor, right? Mm-hmm. But public health and government go hand in hand, right? I mean, public health agencies are part of government at every level, from the federal, state to the city level, right? We have public health laws. We have things in place. We have an emergency declaration statute in the state that specifically deals with public health concerns.
Yeah,
right?
You can't declare war or anything like that, but you can declare a public health emergency.
We absolutely can, and public health for many, many years in this country, for the life of this country has been, right? I mean, in fact, earlier had even more to do, right? Because there were more public health concerns, right? So you see this on a regular basis when it comes to the FDA requiring someone to recall their lettuce because E. coli has been found or whatever, right? I mean, that is a government public health action. And so the government has always had a role to play in protecting public health. We have public health agencies whose job it is somewhat distanced from, right? This is not the city council making public health decisions or policy. We're relying on public health agencies, which are somewhat independent agencies like the CDC, like the Oklahoma State Department of Health, like the Payne County Health Department, who have experts who let us know what's going on when it comes to public health. And if we would have come to 2020 in March of 2020 and had, instead of COVID, had a local outbreak of E. coli in several restaurants because some local supplier had, a problem, we would have had the ability and probably would have done something along the lines that said, if you are a restaurant that has had this supplier or has been in contact, you must shut down for X days and disinfect and do all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think no one in the city would have objected to that at any level, right? I mean, I think people would have understood that a little bit more. Right?
Yeah, we have whole tracking systems for that. Yes. I've worked now in meat processing. You have lot numbers. You have things because you want to tie together, that hamburger you're eating might be many dozen cows all in one. And if it's in one, then it might be in hundreds of thousands of pounds at a mass scale that can get lots of people sick. And so we're trying to trace things back.
Right.
And the government has a role in enforcing that to make sure people don't get sick. Now, the other scenario that we see, right? I mean, if one specific restaurant, if a health club, right? If there was a gym in town that had like an outbreak of what's the norovirus?
Okay.
Right,
yeah.
which you see on cruise ships, right, which comes off touching,
touching surfaces.
And they were not doing anything about it. And we had, a big issue, or if it was a restaurant with, some kind of foodborne illness and they were just serving up burgers and not doing, the government would, whether it's the county or the state or the city, would come in and say, you can't do this, right? Yeah. We have health inspection codes. We have, you are shut down until you fix this problem in your place of business. That's all. I think no one would cast a second glance. They'd in fact demand that the city do something about that specific public health problem.
Yeah.
Right. So in that context, right, I mean, I don't think anybody is going to argue that those things the city should not be able to do.
Right.
And so now what we have is a global pandemic coupled with large-scale disruption to people's lives, right? This isn't just one restaurant I can't eat at. This isn't just one gym. This is now a lot of things, and maybe my employer, and maybe the place I take my kids to daycare, and maybe all these things are now. And you have this unknown virus, right? It's not something that people know about, like E. coli or, oh yes, I've gotten food poisoning in a restaurant before. I know what that's like. Hopefully people don't spread that around, right? This is now an unknown, sort of a new novel virus with a wide scale disruption. And I think that has what caused a lot of people to second guess and say, well, wait, does the government really have the ability to do that? Mm-hmm. When at a different scale, in a different setting, clearly those things are within the state's not only power, but responsibility to act in that way. And so I get it. I understand it. I understand, like I said, when I sat down with John Dorman in March 15th or whatever it was, and I'm signing my name that says something that you restaurants can only serve remotely, or, they serve a curbside, and, bars have to shut down. And, that was not something, one, I knew I could do, or two, I ever wanted to do, or three, ever want to do again.
Yeah.
But I think in my mind, I think I knew that, well, sure, that stuff happens at a small scale sometimes, but having to do it on a large scale was just a totally different animal. And it's confusing, and it's scary, and it's not something any of us enjoyed. And so I understand people who feel strongly about, not wanting to do that. But when it comes to the question of, does the state or the city have a public health responsibility and the power to do something about public health? Absolutely. It always has, always will. It's a necessary part of what state government and city government does. And so, yeah.
I think one thing that was kind of different about this, we're dealing with global pandemic, right? And people are seeing it on the news, they're seeing it go around all around the world, spread across the country. But it seemed like a lot of the pressure to act was placed on local government, which is not where it would normally start.
It was. Yeah, gosh. Just such a weird circumstance, right? It was a very, you were seeing such different approaches in different places, right? So certainly internationally, you were seeing national level measures being taken, lockdowns, whatever it was. In the United States, you were seeing a vastly different approach from state to state, from city to city. And we have a federal form of government, federalist form of government, right? Where the federal government does not have necessarily widespread police power to do certain things. The states have the rights to do most of that. And then the states delegate those rights to cities and towns.
Right.
And like I said, the Emergency Power Act that we use to do these kinds of things comes straight out of the state laws. And so it was a very patchwork sort of a thing. Very different approaches in different places, and a lack of sort of cohesive both recommendations and certainly a lack of cohesive response to those recommendations. So if you remember, the timelines are tough, but fairly early, March, April of 2020, the White House, President Trump's White House had a coronavirus task force. They were putting out here's what we recommend, right? Because the federal government, one, doesn't really have the power to do it in a lot of cases, to do things like shut down a restaurant.
Right.
They don't have the power to do that locally. It's not something that the federal government does. But they were giving sort of statewide or local recommendations based on what your community was experiencing, based on here's what you should do. Well, some of those got applied in certain places and some of them didn't, right? And so it was very much left up to and in our state, right, some states did it at a state level and said, this is what you have to do. In our state, the governor said, we're not really going to do much here. If a community wants to do something, then they can do it. And so we kind of, all of that flowed down directly from the president's task force to the Stillwater City Council and me as the mayor to sort of say, okay, what are you guys going to do? And, we had to make decisions. And our council and me personally, my approach from the very beginning was to listen to Stillwater Medical Center, to listen to the Payne County Health Department and the State Department of Health first. Those are the closest to us, the ones that know the most about our situation. They're getting their information certainly from the CDC and from the federal government's task forces. But when we were trying to make the decisions, and as we try to make those decisions now, we're going to talk about what is the situation in Stillwater. What are we concerned about here in Stillwater? What do we need to do? In March of 2020, we didn't have masks. We didn't have tests. If you recall, the first month and a half, 2 months, 3 months really of this pandemic, if you went to the hospital with a chest cold, they didn't know if you had COVID or not.
Right.
They couldn't get you tested for COVID. And so they had to treat everybody who had a runny nose as if they had COVID because they didn't want to spread this around. And so they were going through PPE like it was, just
and they didn't have that much.
And they didn't have it to, so they did have temporary, they were using trash bags as gowns. They were using, so to me, in that certain situation that we were in at that time, for them to say, we have to do what we can to control the spread of this, it was an easy decision to say, we're going to shut some stuff down. We're going to try to get this under control here for the first couple of weeks until we get our PPE up in place, until we get the ability to test so that we can quickly segregate people off into you're a contagious person and you're not. Until we get to that point, we've got to do something based on local recommendations. And I mean, I make absolutely no apologies for that, and I will not. And I will continue to do that. If they came tomorrow and said, we are in a dire situation and here's what we need to do, and we need to take additional precautions, I would advocate for taking those precautions because that's our job. That is a community hospital. It keeps our people, it delivers our babies, it treats our heart attacks, it does all that sort of stuff. We need those people to be functioning, and that's the approach we took, and we will continue to take.
And now, of course, we have a few more tools. We have some treatments. We've got vaccines. We've got boosters. We've got
totally different world. 2 years later,
we got more supplies. I mean, at one point they were using CPAP machines to help people breathe. So, I mean, obviously in a very different situation now.
Yeah, I mean, the doctors at Stillwater Medical Center in March of 2020 were not only changing every time they went to see a different patient, they had to completely strip down. They had to completely gown back up, mask back up, because they didn't know if this person had COVID. They were leaving to go take a shower and come back between like every few patients because, I mean, they're doing everything they can, knowing they don't have adequate PPE, to try to keep from giving this novel virus that nobody knew anything about at the time to somebody else. It's not the case anymore. Right now, they have their like hazmat suits that they wear. They do, they have the treatments, they have the vaccines, they have, so it's a totally different world. But the criteria is still the same when it comes to how should the government react to public health, right? If there is an imminent threat to the public health and there is something that we can do to help protect the public health at a meaningful level from something like this happening, then we as the government have a responsibility to do it. I mean, it's not it's not hard. It's not a difficult decision from a philosophical standpoint, right? If we are in a position where our hospital could be seriously, put at risk because of a new illness, or somebody has a serious risk of getting ill because some restaurant in town is not, keeping up with their health and safety protocols, then we were going to step in and do what we can to do it. It's a different scale and it's a different setting, and it's, that's what makes it hard. But should we act? Absolutely, we should act.
This has been a challenging couple of years. So, I mean, why do you want to be mayor again?
Yeah,
why do you still want to do it?
I mean,
it's been tough.
One of the things we were kind of talking about, or like kind of putting ourselves in your position, was, I mean, you've got people from both sides. You've got like one thing I think maybe a lot of people don't know is you're also on the hospital board.
Yes.
And as the mayor, so whoever's the mayor is generally on that board. And that's really, is that one of the only like official boards that you're on? Okay.
Yeah.
So you are right there with that leadership, right in the middle of that. And then you've got people, well, here, come read my information about public health. And then you've also got people, in various ways, telling you to your face that you are possibly, ruining the community, hurting people, and all this stuff. How did you balance that, and then also like go home to your family? I mean, did your kids ever watch any of the city council meetings or kind of see like because that's also kind of new in a way, is having the city council. I always thought was always kind of actually interesting, and then it became to me like primetime TV. It's like, oh, we got to tune in.
Doesn't feel that way on the other side of the camera.
I'll bet not.
Okay.
Bet not.
We've had drama at city council meetings in Stillwater before.
It's usually zoning, though.
It's zoning, or we had the oil and gas issues several years ago.
Oh yeah, fracking.
There are times when it becomes very passionate in the community, right? So that's not new necessarily, and it's not really that much different in this setting. Now, I think the arguments being made are different, right? I mean, why is it that people are passionate, or what do they think we're doing wrong? But, when I was running for mayor the first time, we were also passing the initial tax increment financing bill, and that was controversial, and there were a lot of folks who were passionately opposed to that and said some not super kind things.
But nobody spray painted a tunnel with, calling you names or anything like that.
Not that I'm aware of. You're right.
Okay.
This one has definitely been at a different level from some of that, right? So I think for me, the thing I try to remember is, like we were just talking about when it comes to public health measures, it's a big deal, right? I mean, there have been huge impacts to people's lives in this during this pandemic. There's been a lot of stuff that has really been bad for people, and they're upset, and they're passionately opposed to certain things, and I get that. I mean, I think that's it's understandable that people feel the way they feel about certain things. Now, I don't necessarily, that doesn't mean their actions or the way that they express that is necessarily acceptable, but I do try to remember that people are acting out of the feelings that they have towards the situation that they're in, and many people have been in a very bad situation because of all this pandemic stuff. And signing up to be the mayor, or to be on the city council, or to be involved in a position of leadership or authority at this, during any stage, means that you're going to be the one that draws the ire of certain folks who are not happy about the way the world's working right now. And so at some level, I kind of look at it and go, well, they're not mad at me personally. They're mad at whoever's making these decisions, right? Now, some people have made it very, very personal.
Okay.
And that's difficult. I mean, it is, but at the same time, I kind of look at those folks and sort of go, I'm sorry that you're upset. I'm sorry that you feel like this is all my fault. I know that you're not right. I mean, I know that if I felt like I had really screwed something up, or I'd really done something wrong, or I'd really just made a huge mistake in something that we'd done here, then, I think maybe I'd feel differently about it. But I don't. We've certainly made some mistakes. We've certainly, done some things that we would have rather done differently, and had to walk back some things that we've done. But I don't feel like any part of what we've done, or what I've done as the mayor, has been, something that should feel ashamed about, or that I feel like I didn't do the best I could under the circumstances, and that I've always had the best interest of our community and the people that I care about, and here in community, the people of Stillwater, at that's been the goal, to try to protect those folks. And so, if you're upset about that, I appreciate it. I understand, but we've done everything we could to try to do, to make the best decisions we can, and I'm sorry you're mad, but I'm not sorry about what we've done.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got, you've got people who aren't happy about the way things have gone for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're right. It is a generalized unhappiness. I mean, you can't be mad at a virus, or, you can be, but it's,
sure.
You can't put a face on it.
Yeah.
Right. And, but you can put a face on the city council, which is you. So continuing in your role as mayor, what do you see happening moving forward? I mean, do you have goals? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you have goals. Everyone has goals. But do you have any specific goals or programs that you would like to see, being able to focus more on moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Putting aside sort of the pandemic issues, and not that it's over, not that we'll never have to deal with it again, but again, we're in a different phase of it, and I think a much less involved phase from the city's perspective. I have really enjoyed the parts of being mayor that haven't involved pandemic response, right? I mean,
I can see that.
My goals when I first ran for the position 4 years ago, had a lot to do with economic development, with providing an environment in Stillwater that more developers would find welcoming, that they would say, hey, this is a place that, we should go build something, that we should create more opportunity for the people of Stillwater to have places to eat, things to do, places to live. That was the goal, when I got involved, when I started on city council and when I ran for mayor. I've always sort of looked at it, my role here as mayor, as benefiting who I was in 2008, right? I want to be in Stillwater. I love the community. I really, wish I could live there, but I can't find a house. I can't find a job. I don't think there's enough for my friends or my family or, my kids to do there. And to try to help Stillwater move towards being that much more, everybody loves the community of Stillwater, right? When we talk to people about Stillwater who've lived here, 90% of them will tell you, I love Stillwater. I moved because I got a job, or I moved because, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And so trying to make it a better place for some of those folks who would like to stay, and for the folks who are here who also say, I wish we had more places to eat. I wish we had more things to do. I wish there was something else going on. And I think that goal has been, even in the midst of a 2-year pandemic now, I think we've done a good job from a council perspective of creating that environment. We did pass an economic development incentive district that has taken a little while, and it has, it did have some false starts because of the pandemic, but we're now sitting here looking at several really exciting large projects that have to do with the downtown TIF redevelopment area, including a new brewery, including a convention center and a conference center right on the edge of campus, including housing opportunities, mixed use developments. There is stuff happening, and there is excitement, and we're getting, I've had 2 meetings this year already with other new developers who are looking at Stillwater and saying, hey, we want to be part of what's going on. We've also got the whole Boomer Lake Station development that's underway at this point, which will create more places to live, more places to eat, more places to go do things. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think this pandemic has been certainly a huge bump in the road, but I don't want it. I did not want, in deciding to run for mayor again, I did not want to let it win in that sense, right? I'm not going to say, hey, we've got good things happening here. We've been able to make progress on the things that I wanted to make progress on when I started this job 4 years ago. The pandemic has caused a problem. It's caused that to slow down a little bit, and it's caused this job to be not anywhere near as fun as it should be.
Right.
But it's not going to stop Stillwater from going where Stillwater needs to be, and it's not going to stop me from playing the role that I need to play to help continue to make that happen. And so I'm really excited about Stillwater right now. We've had the 2 best years of sales tax collections we've ever had. There's a lot of factors that go into that from a pandemic perspective, stimulus, inflation but even with those things, you're seeing growth and you're seeing new development. It's not just people are buying more, it's costing more, that sort of thing. You're seeing new opportunities for people to go out and shop and things for them to do. And that is, I'm super excited about, and that's what I want to continue to work towards by being elected mayor again.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Will. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for all the time.
Yeah.
We hope we can invite you and Mr. Trotter back, hopefully maybe in a couple weeks, to see if we can do a together
conversation between the
conversation.
two of
you. I'm always open to those kinds of conversations. Would enjoy having that discussion with you guys and with Mr. Trotter, and yeah, I'm available.
All
the
right,
whole point
very
is
cool.
to learn from each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks again to Work It for sponsoring this series. For more information about Studio Stillwater and how you can help support our mission as a listener or sponsor, go to studiostillwater.net. There you can sign up for emails, get a free sticker, or send us a message. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.